of all of the most bleakest concepts that spirituality has to offer, the false light is by far the most unsettling. So today I'm going to be explaining what the false light is and how it shows up in our reality in all the many different forms that it takes. In my video, The Fourth Dimension Explained, I talk about how the fourth dimension has the largest bandwidth out of all of the dimensions, and that how it contains the lower astral planes, and within those planes there's a lot of different belief systems that all congregate there, as well as Masonic and religious themes that get projected into the third dimension, since the third dimension is within the fourth dimension. So the third dimension is being projected into reality from the fourth dimension. And so a strong theme that's being played out, especially within the fourth dimension, but one could even perceive it as going higher than that, is this theme that is being played out between the forces of good and the forces of evil, and the forces of light versus the forces of darkness. And the battleground from which this whole cosmic drama is being emanated from is from what I call a fractured or synthetic light. But down through the ages, this was most well known as the false light. It's called false light because it's not actually emanating from the wholeness of source consciousness. It's coming from this fragmented section of the all of source consciousness that has then created its own domain or battleground from which all of the drama of good versus evil is being projected onto. Now, the reason why this is such a dilemma is because the forces of good and evil within this dichotomy specifically is unaware that they are not operating in the peak experience, meaning they actually think that they are in a peak experience of consciousness, that they are in an enlightened state of consciousness. So this domain of consciousness has no clue and is entirely unaware that the angels and demons theme that are battling one another within it, and all of the godheads that reside within this sphere of consciousness, are all mirroring one another's unintegratedness. These entities, be they lower astral angels or lower astral demonic forces, have severed their consciousness into extreme polarities and are battling in this saga going on in this realm to a never-ending and eternal degree that then gets recruited by our consciousness and gets drained and siphoned, even harvested by the third dimensional consciousness, which fuels it through religion, through our belief systems, even through technology. Pretty much any arena can be used by the false light in order to harvest our soul essence so that it continues to have battery life force, so that it continues to generate this false realm where the fractured light is creating this dichotomy and this very strong polarity of good versus evil. These forces from the false light manifest on every different level of our reality. That means that they're going to take on a different form in each level of reality. So the higher we raise our consciousness, the more we have to cultivate discernment in order to recognize them. Kind of like how if we wake up out of a dream, we have to discern whether or not we're still within a dream that's within a dream. And that's exactly what the false light in its highest form is meant to serve us in this experience as a stern and challenging rite of passage into our own spiritual sovereignty. But we can only do that by being able to cultivate the discernment at every different level that the false light is manifesting on, or else we just reincarnate again into the false light ad infinitum. This is also why there is a strong concept within the conscious community and spiritual circles that have to do with recycling of souls. It's really just we're stuck in samsara because we have not cultivated the spiritual sovereignty and the discernment and our emotional intelligence. Essentially, the ascension of all of our different aspects contained within our energy field into its whole, unified, and integrated form. So it's not that duality is in and of itself wrong or an unnatural force in nature, as there is much to be gained through the experience and the exploration through duality. But the false light is this sectioned off and encapsulated dimension, where this dimension's primary features are through extreme polarization and extreme fragmentation, as well as inversion. This can even just be looked at as an inverted realm, on top of there being the hallmark signature of ego, worship, and a militant form of hierarchy. Now, there's organic and completely aligned forms of hierarchy. However, this form is the form that our military-industrial complex is emanating from. It's a very militant and fragmented form of hierarchy, and the fourth dimension and the false light that's operating within the fourth dimension thrives off of this form of hierarchy through initiation processes that go higher and higher, or they perceive to be going into a higher space when they're really just a labyrinth. They're just this endless ladder that doesn't lead to being any the wiser. It just leads to more rank, more ego, not any form of enlightenment really. So this hierarchy is one of the hallmark signatures of there being a false light structure. So because the false light operates differently at every level of reality, those who have raised their vibration higher than the false light, those who have awakened their consciousness above it, are still not immune to it. Because what happens at that point is that once we have broken out of the frequency of the false light, there's still yet the false light morphing into a form that does not look the same at the different levels of reality that are lower than that. And what that takes on is typically what I call a fake Jesus. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not a real Jesus, but to understand more about the real Jesus, you can watch my video on it, The Secret Teachings of Jesus. This fake Jesus is what you could call an imitation. So it's kind of like if you were to wear a Halloween costume of Jesus, and this fake Jesus goes and preys on those that, one, are at their lowest point in life. These are people who have hit rock bottom. So they're easy to prey on because they'll have very little standards, they'll have very little discernment, but they'll still need a connection to a higher power. And because of that, fake Jesus, or even some of the ascended masters that are operating within the false light, whatever is taking on this sort of like fractured, overcompensating light, will come in and will play upon and prey against that weakness, that state of vulnerability that person is in. But on top of that, you have also the same forces of the false light coming through when you're vibrating higher than the false light. And they come in at that point to lower a being's frequency and reroute them back into their matrix. So you have them preying on rock bottom, but you also have them taking a different form in order to maneuver a high consciousness individual back into its battleground. You can also tell fake spiritual teachers that are possessed by the false light by how much of a fervor that they have without knowing that they're in that energetic frenzy, specifically because the entities who they're serving and they think they're doing good and they think they're doing right by and being righteous by are actually attached to their energy field in a way to where that being is now serving as a way to gain more battery and more life force from other people so that it can go and ultimately be fed into whatever that entity, in this case using the example of fake Jesus, so that that entity can be fed from using that disciple, using that medium of that undiscerning spiritual teacher. And so this is how the false light thrives. And getting beyond this realm may seem to some like it's not a big deal. They got rid of that programming long ago, but you would actually be surprised at how challenging of a step it is for humanity as a collective to energetically cultivate the discernment and the spiritual sovereignty to be able to raise their frequency above this realm, because they're still very much caught in the worship stage, whether it's of a new age angel, like Metatron, or whether it's of Jesus, whether it's from any of the deities that we see that are the epitome of a godhead in any of the ancient or current religious systems. There's this need almost for humanity still to be fueling its belief systems and fueling its worship into the false light in some form or another. The false light is also the dimension where you have this dilemma happening, where people who were a part of the New Age movement wake up out of it, or they see through it somehow, only to go running back to religion. That's no different than a being not understanding that the left hand and the right hand are still a part of the same entity. It's literally just a controlled opposition. So is the New Age dangerous? Sure, every belief system is dangerous, but the New Age isn't this cohesive unit like people think it is. It's this hodgepodge of all these different belief systems that are happening within the spirit of this age, and they don't even all add up or agree with one another. So to just have a blanket statement of the New Age and it being an agenda or evil in and of itself is pretty much just saying that evolution or even revival of ancient knowledge is all a part of some sort of dangerous plot. And there's no discernment in a being who has that view of what's going on in this present age. Instead, all there is a contempt for the contemporary. And then this romanticizing of anything before the contemporary as though that was untouched, as though everything that happened before this age was pure and cohesive. And that never happened either. So with the New Age, you're always going to have, like with any spiritual system, a bunch of belief systems that don't agree and could even have the potential for being dangerous, absolutely. But with everything, it's going to require our own gnosis. It's going to require our own discernment and our own ability to understand what is in relation with what when it comes to our concepts, where they're coming from, and also to know when it's just a New Age frenzy of, false light information that's coming through from channeled beings that are from the false light, demonic forces portraying themselves as angelic, versus what is truly a resource, what is truly a teaching that can help a being integrate and reach their own spiritual sovereignty. Which is why in the false light, you have such a strong theme of worship. It's because they do not want a being to reach spiritual sovereignty. Spiritual sovereignty doesn't mean that you are an island unto yourself in the multiverse. Spiritual sovereignty means you can think for yourself. It means that you are your own authority. And so if you aren't in your own authority, then by default, you fall into a state of spiritual amnesia, because not even the universe, not even the multiverse wants you in a state of spiritual amnesia. They don't need you weak. To be in spiritual sovereignty is actually in alignment with universal law, with natural law, and with the multiverse. So we have this refined and added dilemma when it comes to us raising our frequency, because it's a new level, new devil going on. It's going to masquerade itself as something and scare us because fear lowers our frequency. So it's going to do something to create this fear in us that we are somehow not supposed to be in our sovereignty, that we are not supposed to be raising our frequency or having a higher consciousness above these belief systems that are all operating within the false light. So it's kind of like a way of gaslighting us as we have a higher consciousness, gaslighting us into believing that we are harming people, or gaslighting us into believing that we are being some sort of inverted or satanic form, when in actuality, a being is coming into their own divinity. And when a being is in their own divinity, that doesn't mean that they have placed spirit below them or that they think that they are above spirit. It means that they're in their most natural state, which is spiritual sovereignty. And when you're in spiritual sovereignty, you are in harmony with your higher nature, but you are the representative of the higher nature in human form. So there's no longer this false light operating system of worship siphoning your soul essence. There's no longer spiritual amnesia happening. And there's no longer a play off of the psyche and the mind and body where there's fragmentation that is dueling one another. So then awakening would be to heal that internal conflict that's taking place, which is creating the vibrational match to us having an external reality that is a hall of mirrors, which is showing, it's mirroring to us those distortions at a collective level. And when we're operating at a higher frequency than the false light, all that really means is that we can still be in human form. We could even still be occupying a reality where there's duality, but that there's not spiritual amnesia going on within that reality. Because the spiritual amnesia that's taking place has us separate from our oneness, separate from our divinity. And when that's happening, all of the different hallmarks are happening as well, which is what I said earlier about there being militant hierarchy, about there being supreme worship from a godhead, or there being some sort of ego that's always inserting itself. You can have even right relationship with the concept of ego, but in the false light, as I said, everything is inverted. So you have everything in its most profane form. And a part of that profanity is creating synthetic timelines for humanity to make us believe that we are evolving and progressing, when in reality, we're headed further away from our true power, which is in alignment with spirit. And we're doing this mainly through technology. Now, as I've said in my past videos, technology in and of itself is neutral. It can greatly benefit our evolution, and it can also greatly deteriorate our ability for evolution. But when we're posed with a synthetic timelines, what's happening is that we believe that this version of evolution is actually developing our consciousness and developing our spirit and humanity at large, when in reality, it's creating a degenerative state for us and our consciousness. And that's what the false light wants to align us with. It's synthetic versions of our future and with synthetic timelines, versus there being organic timelines where humanity actually evolves and we integrate our higher consciousness into our human form. So when we're dealing with the false light, there's always this imitation force that's masquerading as this genuine and organic force behind it. And this imitation force is what keeps us in a lower state of consciousness by simply always recycling us and rerouting us back into the matrix of its false light. And if we aren't able to discern an organic and genuine force of any concept from its synthetic and imitative force, then we're going to confuse the two, and we're going to continue to recycle back into this false light. Now, in the third dimension, we have this theme of the false light being played out at the largest scale through our institutions, specifically through what's known as controlled opposition. Controlled opposition is exactly what its name says. It's where you control the opposition. So both sides of any dichotomy, both sides of any paradigm are both controlled and feed into the same arena, and they feed into the same entity. So controlled opposition can even have what looks like a dominant political figure who looks like they've gone completely rogue. And what you'll have is, once again, in the false light and without discernment, you'll have an imitation energy. Let's use the example of divine masculine energy, right? Since we see political figures trying desperately to portray divine masculine energy and failing horribly at it for anyone who has discernment. So let's say you have a divine masculine mockery, right? You have the inverted form because they're from the false light. They're coming from a fractured light. They're not the true divine masculine. You'll have this being say some truthful things here and there, throw out some truths in order to hook you in, and then just be a complete bastardization of the divine masculine energy. A complete pathological, completely erratic, degenerative, that has this overcompensation energy, which is actually not true alpha energy anyways. And it's this overcompensation. So it's overly aggressive, or it's overly confrontational, or it's overly in whatever fragmented aspect that it's operating from. So you have that masquerading as the true divine masculine energy, and that's simply a false light, controlled operation happening where you're controlling the opposition. So for people who have raised their consciousness outside of the institutions that are from a parasitic false light structure, then you also have this added dilemma, right? Because it's new level, new devil, where we have these imposter energies. And the imposter energies, be them of the divine feminine or be them of the divine masculine, whatever is being the imposter energy at that time, comes in to challenge our discernment in order for its highest evolution to be able to grow out of that phase of consciousness. But it also serves as the most enormous block to our own ability to gain true spiritual sovereignty, because we just keep getting stuck in all of these distorted and imposter energies because we haven't yet cultivated the discernment to see through what a true energy is that we're connecting with, whether it's the divine masculine energy. If we truly knew what the divine masculine energy was, we would never fall for any of these imposter energies that are all overcompensating. And that's exactly what the false light does. Even with its light source, as I said earlier, it's overcompensatingly bright where it pierces your eyes and you can't even see it. It's not an organically bright light. It's this overcompensation energy that you'll always see accompanied with the false light, so that you either get put into the polarity of being meek, that's a part of the false light, being super weak, and then on the other end being super aggressive and hyper righteous. And so both of these polarities are one stuck in righteousness, the other one stuck in righteousness. They're just operating at different polarities of this theme of righteousness. So in its most physical form, the false light manifests as parasitic institutions that try to keep humanity from evolving by telling us that they are doing things, they are controlling us for our own good, that they're trying to save us from ourselves. When in reality, they're keeping humanity locked within a certain bandwidth of frequency that can be known as a slave frequency. It's a disempowered and it's a lower frequency that can only sustain itself through constantly injecting fear and confusion into the masses. So it's a lowered, enslaved bandwidth of frequency, instead of having us come into our true state, which is spiritual sovereignty. So the false light, from its highest capacity, can be looked at as a strong rite of passage for humanity. They're providing the trials and the tribulations that are needed in order to cultivate our discernment, in order to create the masterful version of ourselves that would be having the frequency raised above it. And in its lowest nature and in its lowest expression, the false light is known as the prison planet or as the energy farm. So many different names throughout the ages to describe the recycling of soul essence back into the demiurge or back into a negative creation, aka matrix. If this all sounds bleak, it's because it is. It's no wonder that Earth is known as the master school and the master class for only the bravest souls to come and traverse. It's here where we're able to transmute the densest and darkest energies into the highest form of light. And it's here where we reconcile and harmonize all the different aspects of mind and source consciousness. I hope this has elevated you above the false light. Make sure to subscribe to my channel for higher dimensional guidance through spiritual awakenings. See you next time.